There are discoveries that shatter everything you thought you knew about your life. Revelations so profound that they force you to question the very foundation of your identity and your family, truths that emerge from science and data, but create emotional earthquakes that no algorithm can predict or measure. When 45-year-old Tom Mitchell walked onto the Family Feud stage in January 2026 with his wife Rebecca and their 16-year-old son Jake, he was still reeling from DNA test results he had received 3 weeks earlier, results that showed he shared no biological DNA with the son he had raised for 16 years, results that had led to accusations and tears and investigation, and finally to a discovery so unbelievable that when Steve Harvey heard the full story, he would stop the show completely and make a decision that two families needed to meet, needed to confront what had happened, needed to face the truth that a fertility clinic error 16 years ago had given them each the wrong embryo. What happened next would prove that biology and love are not the same thing, that family is both more and less than DNA, and that sometimes the most impossible situations require the most impossible grace. Before we dive into this story of mistaken identity, medical error, and the question of what actually makes someone your child, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Because what you are about to witness will challenge everything you think you know about parenthood and remind you that the bonds we choose are sometimes stronger than the ones we inherit. The Family Feud studio that January afternoon was buzzing with typical game show energy. Two families stood ready to compete, though one of them was carrying knowledge that would transform this from entertainment into something far more profound. On one side stood the Rodriguez family from Houston. On the other side stood the Mitchell family from Denver, which included Tom Mitchell, 45, his wife Rebecca, 44, and their son Jake, 16. Tom and Rebecca stood together, but there was tension visible in their posture, a carefulness in how they held themselves that suggested recent trauma. Jake stood slightly apart from his parents, a tall teenager with his mother's dark hair and his own distinct features that had always made relatives comment that he must have gotten his looks from some distant relative, because he did not particularly resemble either parent. Steve Harvey entered with his usual energy, but the producers had briefed him extensively before this taping. He knew what was coming. He knew this was not a normal Family Feud episode. He greeted both families warmly, made his jokes, but when he reached the Mitchell family, his demeanor shifted subtly. Tom and Rebecca Mitchell from Denver, married 18 years, and this must be your son Jake. Tom's voice was strained when he answered. Yes, this is Jake, our son. The way he said our son carried weight emphasis, as if he was making a point or reassuring himself of something. Steve noticed. Jake, you are 16, that is a great age, tell me about yourself. Jake shrugged with typical teenage awkwardness. I am a junior in high school, I play soccer, I like video games, normal stuff. Steve nodded and was about to move on when Tom spoke again. Steve, before we start the game, there is something we need to talk about. Something that happened that we need to address publicly because we do not know what else to do. Steve set his cards down immediately. Okay, I am listening. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears before Tom even started speaking. Jake looked confused and uncomfortable, clearly not fully understanding what was about to happen. Tom took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I did a DNA test, one of those ancestry kits. I did it because I wanted to learn about my genetic health risks, see where my ancestors came from, normal reasons people do those tests. And when the results came back, they showed something I was not expecting. He paused, struggling. The results showed that Jake is not my biological son, that we share no DNA. The studio went quiet. Steve Harvey's expression shifted from curious to shocked. What do you mean you share no DNA? I mean the test showed zero genetic relationship between me and Jake. Not father and son, not related at all. Steve looked at Rebecca, whose tears were now falling freely. Rebecca, did you know about this? Rebecca shook her head vigorously. No, when Tom showed me the results, when he asked me if I had cheated on him, I was devastated, because I have never been unfaithful, never, not once in 18 years of marriage. Tom continued, my first thought was that Rebecca had an affair. That Jake was not mine. We had a terrible fight. I accused her of lying. She insisted she had never cheated. And then she reminded me of something I had forgotten, something that made us realize what actually happened. He looked at Steve. Jake is an IVF baby. Rebecca and I struggled with fertility for years. We tried naturally and it did not work. So we went to a fertility clinic in Denver. They created embryos from my sperm and Rebecca's eggs and implanted them. Rebecca got pregnant with Jake on the second try. We thought he was genetically ours. Half me, half Rebecca, but the DNA test proved he is not genetically mine. Steve Harvey's jaw dropped. Wait, are you saying the fertility clinic made a mistake, that they implanted the wrong embryo? That is exactly what we are saying, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. After we got the DNA results, we contacted the fertility clinic. They did an investigation. And they found that 16 years ago, they had two couples doing IVF at the same time. Us and another couple. And somehow, someway, the embryos got switched. The embryo that was supposed to be implanted in the other woman was implanted in me, and the embryo that was supposed to be mine was implanted in her. The magnitude of what she was saying settled over the studio like a weight. Steve Harvey sat down on the edge of the stage, clearly struggling to process this. So you're telling me that you have been raising a child for 16 years who is not genetically yours, and somewhere there is another family raising a child who is genetically yours? Yes, Tom said. And we found them. The clinic gave us their contact information. They are here today. They are backstage right now. Steve Harvey stood up abruptly. Hold on, you found the other family, the family that has your biological child? Rebecca nodded. Their names are David and Jennifer Chen. They live in Colorado Springs, about an hour from us. They have a son named Marcus who is also 16, born 2 days after Jake. And when we contacted them, when we told them what the clinic had discovered, they did their own DNA test, and it confirmed everything. Marcus is genetically Tom's and mine. Jake is genetically David's and Jennifer's. Jake, who had been standing silently through all of this, finally spoke. His voice was shaking. I found out a week ago. They told me that the dad who raised me is not my biological father, that my mom is not my biological mother, that everything I thought about who I am is wrong. Steve Harvey walked over to Jake and spoke gently. Son, how are you handling this? I do not know, Jake said honestly. I am confused, I am angry. I do not understand how this happened or what it means. Tom and Rebecca are my parents. They raised me. But I also keep thinking about this other kid, Marcus, who is being raised by his parents, but he is actually my parents' biological son, and I do not know what that makes us to each other. Steve turned to Tom and Rebecca. Have you met the Chen family? Have you met Marcus? Once, Rebecca said. 2 weeks ago. We met at the fertility clinic with counselors present. It was the most surreal experience of my life. Looking at this 16-year-old boy who has my eyes and Tom's smile. This child who is genetically ours but who we have never met before, who calls other people mom and dad. Tom added, and they were looking at Jake the same way, seeing themselves in him, trying to reconcile that this teenager is their biological child but a complete stranger. Steve Harvey shook his head in disbelief. I have been doing television for a long time. I have heard a lot of stories, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. Are the Chens here? Are they ready to come out? Rebecca nodded. They are backstage with Marcus. We all decided together that we needed to do this publicly, that we needed to talk about what happened because we do not know what to do. We do not know how to handle this. And we thought maybe if we talked about it openly, we could figure it out together. Steve gestured to the backstage area. Then bring them out. Because these two families need to have a conversation that I think a lot of people need to witness. A couple appeared at the edge of the stage with a teenage boy between them. David Chen was 46, Jennifer Chen was 43, and their son Marcus was 16, tall and lanky with features that, now that everyone knew the truth, were clearly a blend of Tom and Rebecca Mitchell. The physical resemblance was undeniable once you knew to look for it. The two families stood on opposite sides of the stage, staring at each other, 4 parents and 2 teenage boys whose lives had been irrevocably altered by a medical error 16 years ago. Steve Harvey stood in the middle. David and Jennifer Chen, welcome. I understand this is an impossible situation for all of you. David Chen spoke first, his voice controlled but emotion clear underneath. Impossible does not even begin to describe it. We got a call from the fertility clinic 3 weeks ago saying there had been an error 16 years ago, that the embryo implanted in Jennifer was not ours, that our embryo had been implanted in Rebecca Mitchell, and that we needed to contact the Mitchells immediately. Jennifer Chen continued, her voice thick with tears. Our first reaction was denial. This could not be true. Marcus is our son. We raised him. We love him. The idea that he is not genetically ours, that our genetic child is being raised by strangers, it was too much to process. She looked at Jake, standing across the stage with Tom and Rebecca. But then we saw the DNA results. And then we met Jake. And we saw David's nose on his face, my grandmother's chin, features we know from our family photos, and we had to accept it was true. Marcus, the Chen's son who was genetically Tom and Rebecca's child, spoke for the first time. I am sorry, but this is insane. I have parents. They are standing right next to me. I do not care what some DNA test says. I do not care about some clinic error. David and Jennifer are my mom and dad. Tom Mitchell responded carefully, Marcus, we are not trying to take your parents away from you. We know David and Jennifer raised you. We know they love you, but you are also our biological son. Our genes, our DNA, that is not nothing. It feels like nothing, Marcus shot back. It feels like just information, just data. It does not change who I am or who my family is. Rebecca spoke, her voice breaking. But it changes who we are. Tom and I thought we had a biological child. We thought Jake was genetically ours. Finding out that is not true, that the child we thought was ours is being raised by someone else and we missed 16 years of his life, that is devastating. Jake, standing with the Mitchells, said quietly, so what am I to you? If Marcus is your biological son, what does that make me? The question hung in the air, heavy and painful. Rebecca immediately moved to Jake, putting her arm around him. You are my son. You are the child I carried for 9 months, the baby I gave birth to, the toddler I taught to walk, the child I have loved every single day for 16 years. DNA does not change that. Tom added, when I got those test results, when I first saw that we were not genetically related, I was devastated. But then I realized something. I have been your father for 16 years. I taught you to ride a bike. I coached your soccer team. I helped you with homework. I have been there for every birthday, every milestone, every moment. That is fatherhood, not DNA. David Chen spoke, addressing Jake directly. Jake, you are our biological son. Jennifer and I created you, even if we did not know it, but we did not raise you, we do not know you, and I do not know what to do with that. Do I have a right to claim you as my son when Tom and Rebecca are the ones who actually parented you? Jennifer added, and Marcus, you are Tom and Rebecca's biological son. But you are my child, I raised you, you are mine in every way that matters except genetics. So how do we navigate this? How do these two families exist knowing what we know? Steve Harvey, who had been listening to all of this with visible emotion, stepped forward. I am going to be honest with you all, I do not have answers. This is one of the most complex family situations I have ever encountered. You have two teenage boys who have been raised by one set of parents, but are genetically the children of the other set of parents. And you have 4 adults trying to figure out what that means. He looked at Tom and Rebecca. You raised Jake. You love Jake. The DNA test does not change 16 years of parenting, but you also have a biological son you have never met who is being raised by someone else. That is grief. He turned to David and Jennifer. You raised Marcus. You love Marcus. Finding out he is not genetically yours does not change 16 years of parenting, but you also have a biological son you have never met who is being raised by someone else. That is grief for you too. He looked at Jake and Marcus. And you too, you are 16 years old trying to figure out who you are and where you fit. And now you have this information that complicates everything you thought you knew about your identity. Steve sat down and gestured for everyone to sit as well. Chairs were brought onto the stage, and what followed was one of the most raw, honest conversations about family, identity, and love that had ever been broadcast on television. Tom Mitchell spoke about the shock of getting the DNA results, about the accusations he made to Rebecca, about the guilt he now carried for not believing her, about the investigation into the clinic, and the discovery of what had actually happened. Rebecca talked about being pregnant with Jake, about giving birth to him, about the immediate bond she felt, and about how learning he was not genetically hers felt like a betrayal of her own body, even though logically she knew it was a medical error and not anyone's fault. Jake talked about feeling like his identity had been stolen from him, like he did not know who he was anymore, like the parents he loved might not actually be his parents in the way that mattered, even though they kept insisting they were. David Chen discussed the impossibility of looking at Jake and seeing his own features on a stranger's face, of knowing this was his biological child, but having no emotional connection, no shared history, no relationship. Jennifer Chen spoke about looking at Tom and Rebecca and feeling jealous that they had raised her biological child while also feeling protective of Marcus and not wanting him to feel like he was not enough, like he was not really theirs. And Marcus talked about being angry at everyone, at the clinic for making the error, at his parents for telling him the truth, at the Mitchells for existing, at Jake for being the biological child his parents had wanted, at the whole impossible situation. Hours passed. The game was long forgotten. This was no longer Family Feud. This was family therapy, family mediation, family crisis management happening in front of cameras and an audience that sat in stunned silence witnessing something they had never expected to see. Eventually, Steve Harvey asked the question that mattered most. What do you all want? What is the ideal outcome here? Tom spoke first. I want Jake to know that he is my son. Biology does not matter. I raised him and I love him and that is not changing. But I also want the chance to know Marcus. To have some kind of relationship with my biological son. Not to replace David and Jennifer. Not to disrupt his life, just to know him. Rebecca agreed. Jake is my son, period. But Marcus is my biological child and I missed 16 years of his life and I would like the chance to at least know who he is. David said carefully, Marcus is my son. I raised him and I love him and I am not giving him up or sharing him or whatever this would be called. But Jake is my biological child and I am curious about him. I want to know who he is, so maybe we figure out some way for our families to exist in each other's lives. Jennifer added, I need time, I need to process this, but I think both boys deserve to know the truth about where they came from, and maybe both families deserve to know each other. Steve turned to Jake and Marcus. What about you two? What do you want? Jake spoke slowly. I want Tom and Rebecca to stop looking at me like I am going to disappear. I want them to stop being afraid that I am going to choose the Chens over them just because of DNA. They are my parents, but I also want to know David and Jennifer. I want to know where I come from genetically. I want to know my biological family. I do not think that is a betrayal. Marcus was more resistant. I do not know if I want to know the Mitchells. I have parents. I do not need more parents. Guess I am curious about Jake. About the kid who is genetically my brother or whatever this makes us. So maybe we could get to know each other, just us, without all the parent stuff. Steve Harvey stood up and addressed the camera. What we just witnessed is something most people will never have to deal with. A fertility clinic error that resulted in two families raising each other's biological children. And 16 years later, having to figure out what that means. How do you navigate this? How do you honor both biology and the years of parenting? How do you give these teenage boys the information and relationships they deserve while also protecting the family structures that have existed for 16 years? He turned back to the families. I do not have the answers, but I know that you are going to need professional help. Family therapy, individual therapy, support from people who understand the complexities of fertility medicine and adoption and identity. This is not something you can figure out alone. The episode that aired 3 weeks later was accompanied by extensive resources about fertility clinic errors, assisted reproduction, identity formation in teenagers, and complex family dynamics. Medical ethicists were consulted. Adoption psychologists provided commentary. And most importantly, the Mitchells and the Chens agreed to share their ongoing journey publicly to help other families who might face similar situations. In the weeks after the episode, the fertility clinic that had made the error 16 years ago reached a settlement with both families. The clinic had since gone out of business, but the parent company took responsibility and provided substantial financial compensation. More importantly, they funded long-term family therapy for both families and contributed to research on preventing similar errors. 6 months after the Family Feud episode, the four parents gave a joint interview about their progress. We are taking it very slowly, Rebecca said. The boys meet once a month, sometimes just them, sometimes with parents present. We are building relationships carefully. David added, it is awkward, it is complicated, but Jake and Marcus are actually becoming friends. They have a lot in common, and that is good for both of them. Tom spoke about his evolving relationship with Marcus. Do not expect him to call me dad. I do not expect him to see me as a parent, but we text sometimes. He asks me questions about genetics and family history. I send him pictures of my side of the family so he knows where certain traits came from. It is something, it is more than nothing. Jennifer discussed her feelings about Jake. I look at him and I see my DNA, but I do not feel maternal toward him. Rebecca is his mother, that is clear, but I am glad he exists. I am glad to know him, and I think it is good for him to know where half his genetics come from. The two teenage boys also gave an interview together. It is weird, Marcus said, but also kind of cool. I have this person who understands what I am going through because he is going through the exact same thing from the other side. Jake agreed. We are not brothers, we are not even really friends yet, but we are something. We are connected by this massive mistake that neither of us had any control over, and we are figuring it out together. 2 years after the Family Feud revelation, Both families attended Marcus's high school graduation together. They sat in different sections, but they were all there, acknowledging this milestone in his life. Tom and Rebecca gave Marcus a gift, a family tree showing his genetic heritage, something they had spent months researching and compiling. When Jake graduated a few months later, David and Jennifer were there too. They gave him a similar gift, information about his biological heritage, medical history, and genetic traits. 5 years after the episode, Jake and Marcus were both in college and had developed a genuine friendship. They did not live near each other, but they stayed in touch, visited occasionally, and had found a way to exist as two people connected by an impossible circumstance. Four parents had also developed a cautious but real relationship. They were not close friends, but they had learned to coexist, to share space at graduations and birthdays, to respect each other's roles in these two boys' lives. 10 years after the revelation, when both Jake and Marcus were 26, they gave a joint interview about their unique situation. "People ask me if I wish I had been raised by my biological parents," Jake said. "And the answer is no. Tom and Rebecca are my parents. They raised me, they love me, I would not trade that for anything. But I am also glad I know David and Jennifer. I am glad I know Marcus. I am glad I have the full picture of where I come from." Marcus agreed. "David and Jennifer are my parents, full stop. But knowing Tom and Rebecca, knowing my genetic heritage, knowing Jake, that has added something to my life. It has not replaced anything. It has just expanded my understanding of who I am." Steve Harvey, in retrospective interviews about the DNA results episode, spoke about the profound impact it had on him. "That day challenged everything I thought I knew about family. These two families had been raising each other's biological children for 16 years. And when the truth came out, they had to decide what mattered more, biology or the years of love and parenting. And what they discovered is that it is not either or. Both things can be true, biology matters, and parenting matters." Jake is Tom and Rebecca's son because they raised him, but he is also David and Jennifer's biological child. Marcus is David and Jennifer's son because they raised him, but he is also Tom and Rebecca's biological child. All of those things are true at the same time. If you have been moved by this story of medical error, biological confusion, and the complicated question of what makes someone your child, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this with someone who has struggled with questions about biology versus environment, nature versus nurture, genetics versus parenting. Remember that Tom and Rebecca Mitchell raised Jake for 16 years believing he was their biological child. David and Jennifer Chen raised Marcus for 16 years believing he was their biological child. Both families were wrong because a fertility clinic made an error. When the truth was discovered through a DNA test, when these two families had to confront what had happened, they faced an impossible choice. Do you pursue a relationship with your biological child at the risk of hurting the child you raised? Do you acknowledge that the child you love is not genetically yours, and what does that mean? Both families chose not to choose. They chose to expand rather than replace. They chose to acknowledge that Jake is both the Mitchell's son through parenting and the Chen's son through biology. That Marcus is both the Chen's son through parenting and the Mitchell's son through biology. That both things can be true. That family is more complicated than DNA, but also DNA is not nothing. This is the reality that these families live with every day. It is not perfect. It is not simple, but it is honest. That is the lesson, not that biology does not matter, not that parenting is all that matters, but that both are real, both are important. And navigating the tension between them requires grace and time, and the willingness to expand your definition of family to include people you never expected to claim.